Okay, we're recording.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the building query call for Monday, October 28th. Today, is this meant to be non-public? No, it should be public. I should make that public. Rob just posted in the chat asking about a Google Doc that I'm about to make public. Oh, that says people at query. Oh, I have to change this. But yeah, what are we going to do today? Just to talk quickly through it. I was really enjoying our Data Together annual meeting where we split the meeting in half and did half of the time working and half of the time talking. And a lot of that is building off of work that I witnessed in the Environmental Data Justice Working Group at EDGI, which I think was like this wonderful precedent of people just joining calls and saying, "Okay, we're going to do something together." Rico, do you mind muting?
Sure.
No, thanks. Sorry, just the train noise. And so today if at all possible, I think one of the biggest sources of confusion we've had is as query has grown, we've sort of, the commands in query and the glossary of terms and what things do is kind of drifted a bit. And I'd love to just take some time, sort of 15 to 20 minutes today to all co-work on this Google Doc that I will make public in 1 second. It's just a listing from the query command line of all the commands and what they do and their current descriptions. And I think we should take this as like an open field to rename some of those commands and rethink the way that they all sort of interact with each other. Because I think they're sort of a source of confusion there. As a classic example, Chris recently finished some work on Query Cloud that changes the name of getting a data set to clone, but it's still called add and to acquire the data set. And I think that's a great example. And so, yeah, today I was just hoping if we could spend 15 minutes just all sort of heads down looking at this doc. And then after that 15 minutes, that'll take us to sort of 2:20 in Eastern time. And then we can sort of come back together and just chat about what everybody's learned. So ideally, everyone can just edit in suggestion mode and not in edit mode. And then we can just use comments and suggestions. Sound good to everybody? So I'll make this doc public right now, Rob. Hopefully you can get access to it. Anyone with query on public on the web, on anyone with the link can edit, save, copy link. All right, Rob, try that. Good? Cool. All right, so everyone want to take a look. I'm going to finish copy and pasting the actual detailed command descriptions. There's the overview in the top, and then below are the sort of full descriptions when you type help in the whole thing. So I'll finish pasting those as everyone else works. At the end of this meeting, we will post this somewhere public. All right, cool. Does anybody need more time? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. This is super productive. And so before we sort of as we're coming back, I think before we all sort of talk, if you could pick in your head what you thought the biggest thing you want to surface as a change would be. We'll sort of just go around the room and ask about it. Rob, you had a hand first. First one to flinch.
It's not a single thing, but I feel like there was at least initially early on an intent to try and not use Git's language. And now it feels kind of like a hodgepodge where we've sort of borrowed Git's language for a lot of things. And sometimes it's the same-ish, sometimes not, because the model's not the same, right? It's a little confusing. What's a clone and what's a checkout, because that idea is very different in query. There's not an equivalent. The query versions aren't at all equivalent, and it leaves things like remove in a space where they used to make sense because it was a good analog term to add, but no longer, it doesn't fit with clone anymore, that kind of thing.
Totally. And so that is, to me, is a perfect setting, it really captures what I wanted to talk about. And this is really helpful sort of go through it all. Yeah, because a lot of these commands were sort of named in tandem, we thought it would be add and remove working in conjunction. Other examples are sort of what else? Yeah, I guess, no, there were some others we've had some conversations about like export versus get and like what the difference between those two are and how they work. But I think you've sort of hit the central point is like we've used get as a point of conversation a lot, and we've as we've done more talking to people who use query, I think that we're not get, and so knowing when to borrow from get and when not to borrow from get is a really important and discussion that we should sort of slow down and think through. It's like in the office, I think we talked a lot, and we actually did. I feel like we came to a fairly strong conclusion that clone is actually pretty close to what's going on in between both. But to your point, exactly like checkout, it's a different story. It's doing a different thing. But yeah, Rob.
On the command line, does clone or what used to be add also check out?
If you give it the FSI flag, yeah. So then I guess you're right. It's not exactly the same. No.
I mean that's the expectation that would break for me.
Yeah.
But also I think there's long
I had a note about that.
Sort of some confusion or weirdness around like the query repo and that term colliding with like an understanding from Git, and what things are like acting on the query repo versus acting on your working directory. And a thing that's been floating around in my head is maybe a better way to think of the repo as like your local database, and maybe that's also a better terminology to use. Might help clarify things if you can talk more about this is doing something to your local database, this is doing something to your working directory.
We've the word DB has come up, or database as a rename for repo has come up a few times. You saw Chris just give a thumbs up. Chris, do you want to say anything to that?
Yeah, I think I mentioned to you last week. I've come up with this notion in my head of, I don't know, when you start thinking of query as a database, which we always said it was, but like once you start really thinking of it that way, it has informed a lot of my thinking about what the UI for the desktop should actually look like, because it's a database, not just files, and it should look a lot more like UIs that exist for databases, and query data sets become tables in the database. And I think that's the feels like the right analogy to me. I think the really awesome thing is we can talk about is that you can take all this time and set up a Postgres database with 20 different tables in it that you've imported from different sources, but moving that around is extremely difficult. And I think that can be a big differentiator for queries. That yes, we got your database, but your tables can just be things that you pull from other people that are sharing their tables and just bring them in with a command. You can change them, update them, and modify them, and then send them right back out to the community with ease in a way you can't with any other database technology. So we think about it that way, and we stop saying repo and just start saying database and start calling data sets just table equivalents or something like that. I think it puts everything in a nice. They're just things in a bigger thing. And we can draw some nice diagrams around it and just make it so that these things are just, they live here, they're all together, you can query them together, but they're all portable as well.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think that modality invites more than just renaming repo to database. It sort of invites us to think about like database terms and how those maybe intersect with some of this. Like we've called it query connect, and I intentionally thought that was kind of fun in the beginning, that connect is sort of like connect your database. It's like your DWeb database, but it's sort of kind of not. You don't pick a specific database to connect to, but you do connect. But yeah, I think there's if one of the questions is Git is a major influencer because we do version control, should database terms should get be select? Is that?
I'm a little concerned if we rename to database, just that there's potential confusion between the two terms. You now have this possibility of typoing a lot between data set and database. But from vocabulary standpoint and messaging, it definitely does make sense to talk about your repository as a database, because it's the centralized, invisible, non-file system thing that's keeping everything in one place. Yeah, agree with all the confusion around how the repo is positioned and like how we talk about it. Separate topic, like separate tangent. One thing I kind of didn't know how to totally like do notationally was that I think we should make another top level category for commands just for the ones that are working with your file system. So in its status checkout, restore, and FSI, just like we're all kind of doing things that are specific enough and like interrelated enough to each other that they should be in their own category. And that kind of also helps to separate out that like the other commands are more focused on your centralized repo as opposed to like working with some directory somewhere. Yeah, those were the thoughts. Also looking through some of the old docs, like there's a lot of stuff that's just like outdated terminology we don't use anymore that could use a lot to clean up, but I mean, that's kind of what we're doing. But yeah, there's a lot of like old terms that were in use at one point that like we should definitely like update.
Go ahead, Rob.
In a similar vein about like different groupings or top level ideas, I think I commented on something, I think logbook, that maybe there needs to be a place for something that are more like low level or like debug oriented. And I think maybe FSI like also fits in there, right? It's not really a thing that is really there for tooling around with most of the time. It's for like if something is weird, because it's not really meant to be sort of a user visible feature.
I love it. Go ahead, Dustin. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But relatedly also, I don't know if we should keep FSI as like a user visible concept. Like it works good for like an internal code name, but I think it's gonna like scare people off, like having this acronym that like is both unique to what we're doing, but also not like obvious like what it's actually talking about. I have been putting like working directory when we're talking about you know, having files like on disk, and maybe that's too close to Git terminology because it's not exactly the same thing that they do, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, I love it. I think both Rob and Dustin are sort of getting at this sort of, I do love the plumbing and porcelain sort of like distinction, and the idea that we have benefit oriented commands that, and the idea that FSI is plumbing. The notion of FSI is like really, it's what enables a working directory. And to me, like a working directory command really helps. Yeah, or maybe like, yeah, linked directory. To me, the word linked is like that's a very, that term, like the word link has like a million different meanings in a million different places. And so I'm honestly kind of like leaning towards working directory personally, because I feel like it, yeah, the wormhole directory. But yeah, I fully support the idea of having like some sort of like working directory commands, like directory commands, and pulling FSI out of that, pulling and what you were saying, Rob, about logbook. Like again, logbook's like a porcelain or a plumbing command that like people shouldn't be exposed to unless they go looking for it. Yeah, all these to me feel like really, really like fast, easy wins that like if we just put this in for the next release, this would really help clean up the way the command line functions. And I think a lot of, yeah, Dustin, returning to your point about the database, I think maybe we conceptually model the database. I'm not about to go rename packages quite yet, but like I think it's really worth us like kind of playing with that concept in our heads. Like is like we've drawn that Venn diagram a lot in our sort of like talking about query of like version control, database, peer-to-peer network as the three sort of things that we're an assembly of. And I think it's worth sort of thinking about this database side of things and what commands that we actually like from databases. Like to me, select jumps out. Like get, renaming get or even aliasing get to select feels like an interesting, and it's naturally what we're sort of talking about with this new sort of filter stuff and like working towards being able to do data set joins naturally and sort of fluently. Yeah, so I think it's just worth, I don't think this is something we can do in the span of a call, but like it might be a nice counterbalancing weight to the Git sort of vortex. I think a lot of us as engineers who work with Git and are familiar with these concepts, like really, for me, it's a very easy thing to reach to. And I keep thinking about people who don't know Git and feeling like we need to gather feedback from people who like don't understand that sort of workflow before we just like go naming everything push and pull, which like publish is an easier word than push, but it's also like weird when you're publishing something that's encrypted. So there's like some confusion there too. Anyone else? Anything jumping out? Kind of continuing along that vein of like hiding things. I like that like as a nice like heuristic. We've got a registry command right now that's exposed in network commands. And I think this is like a fun question to ask, like, is the notion of a registry something that like a user should be thinking about as like a high level benefit to them? Or should they just be able to like do whatever they need to do? Like how little can we surface to make this usable? Do we need the registry? It's a genuine question, I have no idea.
I think maybe you could bury it a little bit under like config or something, but it seems important, especially if you want the future where this stuff is more distributed. Like somebody has to be able to, I mean, maybe that's something, maybe it's another way of thinking through remotes. I mean, maybe registry needs to be buried into the idea of like just some remotes can do more fancy things than others, and it's just another remote. I don't know.
No, I love that, and I think that's exactly where we should go. Like this question of remotes is a real, like, remotes are a concept, right? So I don't feel like we need the query remote command, but maybe like I don't know. And we genuinely have been on a trajectory for a long time to try and make a remote the big thing that you think about. It's just like some other place. And so conceiving of the registry as a fancy remote is the way that like we're actually writing code against that all the time. And so that really squares with the way that we talk about it. Where does a remote get explained? How in configuration or how in the current command line setup would you enable remote features? Like how do I turn my, because currently the way I make my query data set, my query repo or remote is I do query config set remote dot enabled equals true, right? Or not even equals enabled space true. And then I have to do query config set remote max size 10 megabytes. And then I have to do a couple of other things, which is, it's basically just a series of configuration commands. But like, should we be pushing that concept and have like remote and put registry underneath a sort of remote command?
I mean, I think the registry as the registry is something different from a remote, only matters for a handful of commands where you're like, oh, I want to get this thing from somewhere, or I want to like search. So I don't know, like I wonder if in the Git world, you don't really have the idea of a remote outside of a repo, like it belongs to the repo, and probably if it doesn't belong to the data set, which would be the identical thing in query, like maybe it belongs to the data set, but you could also have ones that are like set up on your local system, or maybe it just doesn't belong to the data set. I don't know. But, you could have like a default, that's kind of like origin in Git, which is just the standard name that gets used. So that whenever you search or try and get a data set or whatever, that's the one it asks for, unless you explicitly specify another remote.
Yeah, that's the way the registry currently works right now. It's the default remote, quote unquote. While you were talking, Rob, it sort of like dawned on me that one of the other things that I've been having issue with as we design the remote sort of spec is like, currently we have a remote and remotes in the configuration. And remotes is the list of places you can push stuff. And a remote single is, am I a remote? And I think that the remotes plural actually is pretty easy to confuse with peers, because like what I actually want to be able to say is like query publish Mr. Ogrog this data set, and like that sort of like overlays quite nicely. If and then it, you know, you would get the classic error of like Mr. Ogrog is not accepting data sets right now, unless they had configured like. It's like maybe we actually need to take the notion of remotes and merge it with the concept of a peer, which is actually kind of what we're getting at. Rico, how does that sit?
I think that's what I was thinking. Sorry, I was just going to say that's sort of what I was thinking.
And like that again feels nice in the sense of like, okay, now we're not just entirely thinking from Git. Although on the like super low plumbing commands, we have the words push and pull for like moving data sets around. That's kind of mechanical. What you're really doing is like getting something to appear, right? And I think it's interesting to conceive of like other actors in the system as just peers, right? And peers, some peers have, some peers accept data sets and some peers don't. It's interesting. Rico, does any of this sort of like, from your sort of like working with folks in the beta program, have any of these commands in particular come up as like super confusing? I know most of them aren't working with the CLI, but like.
Yeah. No, I don't think we've gotten any kind of indication one way or the other. Like we've been pushing desktop so much from that, so that I don't think there's too many people who are command line.
Totally. But like, and it's interesting to think about the commands that desktop currently services. I think we can list them off without looking at it. Add, which will become clone. Create a data set. We actually, and then we have a bit of confusion around the words save versus commit. Because currently the like a save is called a commit, and we've talked a lot, and we've had a lot of ambiguity on desktop around the word version, and whether a specific commit in a data set is a version, and whether we go all the way and call it a commit and call it a version. I know that's been some stuff that's shown up in feedback. If you want to talk about that, anybody just want to express opinions on the commit version debate?
I tend to like commit, but also it comes from the Git world, of course. I don't like I think the button actually says submit in Query Desktop. And then once you submit, it goes, the new thing appears on a list that says you have 6 commits. So it's like submit, commit, save. I think, yeah, save and version seem to go hand in hand. Although then there's also the, if I'm iterating on changes, I'm going to be saving every time I want, query to pick up on them, but I'm not ready to save them as a query version yet. So I'm saving all the time, saving in the file system sense, but I'm not committing my changes in the Git commit, archival for history purposes sort of sense. So anyway, that doesn't, I don't have a strong opinion, but I tend to like commit because it's a different thing than save. I think everyone knows what save is. And I don't think there's anything wrong with making you learn a new thing when you're using query because you're doing a new thing. It's not the same as saving to your file system. That's all I have.
On this topic, like, I was just thinking, what would it look like if we changed the save command and the commit command, like that could still work. The weird thing is like we have a component called commit. So like commit is, it's a noun, it's a thing, it's an object, but we also have like a verb for it. But maybe there isn't a problem there. Like you're running a command called commit. It's making a new commit component, but also like that kind of makes sense. Like it makes like this concrete mapping of what you're doing. There's also this other can of worms of like this question that comes up from time to time of like the space versus time question of like, if I have a data set where I'm running updates whenever like a new version is available of that raw data, and then I have some pipeline processing it. Like I change the pipeline, that's a different thing than I get a new update of the data from like the source I'm consuming. You know, maybe we could work like the version vocabulary into that, but I mean that's kind of a larger discussion that probably shouldn't get too bogged into right here. Something that popped into my head.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Do you have something? Yeah, I mean, I think the space versus time one is like this giant can of worms. I agree, it's a biggie, but I don't think commit is so, like you said, I think Chris, you really make a really good point that like the one new thing that we're teaching people is about committing to changes and like making versions of stuff. And it is a different thing than saving. And I think this becomes particularly, it's much more obvious when when we have to disambiguate, did you save the file or did you commit the version, right? Like this, like that, and to me, like that's a real sticking point. That like once we shipped desktop, I was like, shit, this feels weird, right? Like how do you talk about, oh well, query when you edited metadata, query saved the file, and someone's like, cool, so did that make no history? No, you have to save a version. Okay, that's, and then like we've also, just to sort of reference some of our other conversations here, like we've also had some confusion and like one feature that many folks have expressed an interest in is like this version this version was in the slide deck that went to the boss, or this version is like important. Like this is like the equivalent of releases, right? Like Git has tags for this, and we talk about versions of a data set there. I just want to surface that because we haven't talked about that in this conversation, but it's sort of another more pressure on the phrase version. And I think that the word commit, if you sort of like think back to the like motivation, what must have been the motivation for the word commit is like you're committing your changes, you're literally stamping your name on them. And I think I don't think that that's so bad, and I don't think that this is a place where copying Git is such a bad idea.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I feel like nobody uses you never really hear the word version in the Git world unless it's somebody talking about Git to people who aren't familiar with it, and will say it's a version control system, and everybody is using a different version of the code, and we're blending all their versions together. But like developers never use it. They don't say version. Like, hey, I have the wrong version of code on my machine right now. Like, I'm on the wrong branch. It's different. I don't know. I think we can still talk about versions, even if the nomenclature is different when you're actually doing it. Because it's still like when you rise above all of this, yes, the versions, that's when we can talk about when we do demonstrations, that's when we can talk about when we do talks, but like, the lingo is commit when you're actually doing it. That's, I think that's just saying version. Like version is for the one-liner that explains it, and then commit takes a couple more minutes to learn, but it's like another little.
Yeah, Rob, do you want to clarify some of your comments from the chat? Then Dustin, I'm totally down. We should definitely rename submit to commit.
I was just saying, like, I think I largely agree, but I also think the reason version doesn't get used in most version control systems isn't that it's not the right word for it. It's that it collides with another previously existing well-used term in the development world, which is a version is more like a release or publish. And so you'd have deep, massive, incredible confusion the same way we're talking about save versus commit. So I think that's why it doesn't happen there more than something else. Although that's not to disagree with anything else that you're saying. It's just to like clarify that. I think maybe looking to Git or Subversion or Darks or whatever for this kind of thing is maybe not. I mean, it might be the right answer, but looking to it as the guide is maybe not the right one, because the reason that term isn't used there, I think, is a different reason than you might not use it here.
Yeah, I think that's one. I think you raised a really interesting point, Rob. That like we don't really think about like golden master publications of a data set, and maybe that's just because we've never really had version control, right? Like we don't know, and like we do know from user feedback that like some kind of tagging of, I mean, switch to using the nomenclature of commits is like a highly desired feature, so that someone can. But that tagging speaks everyone has described it so much more in terms of annotations, where it's like, I would like to annotate this commit for historical purposes of it having been like, not like this is our master release of a data set, but instead this is a point at which we relied on this. And that seems to be the way that most people talk about it. It's not like, I don't know that it's necessary that we're going to do semantic versioning for data sets. That doesn't fully make sense. But maybe it does. Maybe we should talk about, you know, anytime you make a breaking schema change, that's a major version number change, which could be really cool. But like, maybe that's just like a practice that carries over from engineering that doesn't work in data engineering.
Well,
So it's really,
I don't
it's a
know.
really good point.
I don't know if this is relevant at all, but like just speaking from, you know, the data sets that are released quarterly, you know, at my old place of employment, which was a city government agency, you know, they basically do 4 per year, and they call them, you know, the last 2 digits of the year, and then V1, V2, V3, V4, which is its own little language, but you know what you're looking at, and you start looking at the same data set over time. I can look at, you know, what happened in New York in 17 V1 versus 19 V2, and start making comparisons that way. And that means something to people that are in that sector.
That's perfect. So people are doing this. Yeah. It's just a question of like, if we were to try and take that practice and make it rigorized, do we just take that and try and spread that exact convention that you just described everywhere? But yeah, I think this is all cannon fodder for like the word version is contentious even in our space. I don't think it's, I think this like definitely highlights that. And it also means we wouldn't have to rename the commit component, which would make me very happy because I don't want to rename that component. But yeah, cool. All right, so with 10 to the hour, I think this is like really helpful. And just like, I want to turn our attention really quickly back to the doc. I think some really nice stuff has come out of this conversation. And so everybody's been editing in suggest mode, but things I think that should totally go in. Personally, I think this working directory commands. Oh, Rob.
Can I make I just wanted to point out, in case it's useful, don't need to talk about it at all, that I think I sent you, Brendan. I don't know if you could send it to other people. I thought there was a super interesting data set I ran across recently that had a whole write-up about how they did versioning. That was super interesting because I had never seen anybody try and do rigorous semantic-ish version control for like a published data set before. So example of like a good way to go about it.
I will pull that out of our chat history, Robin, and make sure that gets published widely. Yes, that was a great piece. Yeah, definitely. And we should reference that before we like go any deeper into like versioning question, because like someone who's taken an honest crack at it, that should get folded in. Thank you. Excellent bit. Yeah. So I think like a bunch of the stuff really sort of shakes up pretty quickly. The 2 obvious wins, I think, or a couple of obvious wins that shake out of this. I think we should have a chat at the end of this about the word commit, but working directory command stuff, moving a bunch of things into a sort of plumbing command side of things, using databases as database commands. We should go take a look at like Postgres's commands and see what those look like, and try and see if any of that sort of matches our nomenclature. I think there's an open discussion about remotes and whether we should just talk about overlaying that concept onto peers. That I think should be sort of considered, but I want to spend some more time with that before we just like go all the way with that. But I think it's kind of much nicer if we use this like notion of, I think there's something to be gained there. And if we can drop a concept, then I think that's good. But yeah, I think we should just like kind of take a vote on commit and making that the word, because I feel like we're really close on this. Personally, I'm going to be super biased here. I'm in favor of renaming save to commit and calling it that everywhere. Anybody have any strong objections? And I think we can really focus on teaching the world that doesn't know version control that the word commit means something different from save. It's a little slower. So, and like, I can remember when a guy named Elliot at General Assembly, hopefully Elliot one day we'll chat again, he like taught me how to space out my commits. And he was like, and he just turned to me and said, every time you get like a nugget. And then I was like, a nugget. and I didn't really know what he meant, but like you sort of know it when you feel it. And I think that if we could teach people about sort of that idea of like what it means to sort of create a journal of commits is like a really powerful and useful thing. Cool. So commit it is. I'm going to leave this doc open. If others want to keep adding feedback, let's just like have this here. And if you want to draw people to this, like I know, shout outs to Kevin, who had really pushed for the idea of replicate over clone. And I think that we should sort of add that at least to our history. He put a ton of thought into the idea of replicate. I think there's still room for the word replicate in what we're doing. I think it's a concept that we should save for when our peer-to-peer network technology is a little stronger than it currently is. But we'll get there. Yeah, with that, we got 5 minutes left. I just want to take 2 minutes to like get quick feedback on this sort of different meeting format where we actually try and get something done in a meeting and then talk through it as a group. Does this feel more productive to others?
Yes, definitely more productive. I think if you're just watching this video on YouTube, you might have missed about 15 minutes of silence where you didn't know what was going on. So we should be smart about maybe posting a link in the YouTube description to this if we plan to keep it live and make it public. But in general, since this is still mostly for the people on this call, I think it's a very good use of time.
Yeah, and I was thinking with the video, we could just cut out the 15 minutes of dead silence so that no one has to just look at us staring at screens. We do have the power to edit video, so maybe we should do that. But amazing. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking some time to look at this. And also massive thank you to you, Rob, for filing all of these issues and jumping on our Discord and helping us sort of debug things. It has been so delightful. Your name has pinged around our office a lot this week around like, man, this is so great, and ways we can fix this and ways we can make this better. So it's really, really appreciated. Genuinely, it's really nice. Yeah, I think that's kind of all I got. Anybody have any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of week.